Okay, so this is The Claw, and our guest today is Gary Alfonso, MD of CNBC Africa. Gary.
Hi, Paul.
What I wanted to talk to you today about was the new media transition. So we keep hearing about digital convergence and all of this stuff. We know that there are legacy media players in the form of the print guys and so on. Where's this stuff all going? I mean, are we all just like careering towards everything on the web? Where's the money to be made? How does the South African scene and the African scene look?
Well, first of all, do you know that they're going to be combining Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook? Do you know this? Have you heard?
I haven't. What's the name going to be?
It's going to be called YouTwitface. You haven't heard? Anyway, the important part is that, yeah, digital media and digital platforms are certainly changing the way us as media companies are looking, not only at consumers, but the commercial models behind it. Interesting point is Google is only breaking even in the last year. And YouTube is not making money yet. The Twitter, no one knows where that's going. What 140 characters mean in the business and commercial space, no one knows. And Facebook is by no stretch of the imagination a company whose real valuation you can actually peg to a material value. Because the problem is, you can have 1 billion users worldwide, but if you don't know how to commercially extract value from it, as far as investors are concerned, that's one of the big stories out there. It might be the second bubble, we don't know. From a media company perspective, the questions we ask ourselves all the time is it effective? Yes, social tools are hugely effective. Hugely. And look at what happened in North Africa. Look at how in Egypt social media brought about democratic change in the country. And that's a good thing for business. So as a tool, yes, as part of a tool for media, the issue is at what point does convergence in the information aspect and spectrum of a consumer's mind converge? When is your pictures from your grandmother and your sister and your brother and your friends, when does that converge with information that you want every day, information about your changing world and information that impacts your life? Therein lies a truth somewhere, and that's what us as media companies are looking at. I think it's without a doubt, it's a foregone conclusion that magazines as they existed in the past are not necessarily the way magazines are going to continue in the future. Just this month, Media24 closed down another 2 publications in the past month. Avusa, another big media group, is looking at changing a very recent acquisition it did in that Universal Hurt acquisition from Durban. Its current shareholding and new shareholders coming on board is saying, they don't like the direction where the company's going.
Okay.
So how that converges is going to be very interesting for all of us.
So just let's talk about the hardware side of it, because we forget how fast this progress has actually been. In your perception, we are heading towards an environment where everybody is on some kind of tablet device, everybody has a smartphone, everybody is always on, and everybody has access to relatively cheap bandwidth. I mean, is that your assumption, that we can take for granted?
Absolutely. The platforms are going to evolve faster than anything else, and how the content changes is going to be the intrinsic value for shareholders in media.
Okay, and the other $64 million question that always gets asked to media owners, so I might as well ask it of you, is there stuff which people are prepared to pay for? In other words, does the subscription model exist in the future, or is it all just like this enormous value-rich content which people are prepared to accept some degree of advertising alongside it?
An interesting trend in the United States, where I've just returned from, one of the interesting points is that people are prepared to start paying for relevant content.
We've just seen New York Times sort of successfully impose a new paywall thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in that way, one of the interesting things happening in print media companies is that the concept of the editor, the editor of the publication, is changing to the chief product officer, because no longer can an editor just be somebody that sits back and religiously polices the content, because from an editorially independent perspective, everyone knows that's sacrosanct. But from what the consumer wants at the end of the day is, does the consumer want editorial information as opposed to someone who is the gatekeeper, or do they want both sides of the story? The biggest content being used in the US is Paris Hilton and Kim Kardashian. That has no editorial relevance whatsoever.
But
yet
it's huge.
It's being consumed on Apple tablets and wherever you go, more than other content. And that's where media companies are grappling with the concept of, and it's all free. So that business model of where you place your critical core competencies is becoming an issue.
Let's talk again about YouTube, because as you said, Google bought it from a bunch of guys, college kids messing around, paid what looked like big money at the time. Do you think that YouTube, I noticed that ABN Digital serves the video clips from TV shows on YouTube. Do you think that YouTube will supplant television in due course? In other words, that broadcast television starts to become an antiquated model and people sit down in front of web-enabled TV screens in their homes at night and they kind of browse between different YouTube clips, YouTube channels?
I think YouTube is in a catch-22 situation where it actually has a problem in third-party proprietary content and content that you, me, and our grandmother and cousin who wants to imitate Barack Obama and you know, send their jokes out into the world, we're actually getting through that absolute mad universe of content becomes a critical issue, whereas some of the film distribution companies around the world are certainly, Flickr for instance, and other companies are starting to make some inroads into the mind space of the consumer, whereby if a new movie comes out, I would just as well watch it on my television screen at home a week after it's been released and wait for it in that fashion so that it doesn't impinge on the rights of cinemas around the world. I would do that online if I had the bandwidth, if I didn't have to sit through buffering, which is where the telecoms platforms have to be better, and where regulators around the world need to also understand their role in as far as media is concerned, making it accessible for the consumer at the end of the day. And it's not necessarily only something owned by a media company such as...
that whole dynamic debate about net neutrality. Let's just bring it back home to South Africa though, because investors in our scene here have either got Naspers, which is a giant, mostly because of that huge business Tencent in China, and then there are some minnows. You know, there's some print publication guys like Caxton. Avusa is always up to some misadventure. There's talk about it being bought out. Then there's some really small guys like MoneyWeb and so on and so forth. So, I mean, is the media space, with all of this uncertainty, with all of this question mark over business models and profit margins, it doesn't sound to me like something you really want to be involved with as an investor, except perhaps the Naspers thing, because, you know, Tencent could be, you know, bigger than Facebook.
I think the biggest problem South African media companies have is that they're South African. They do not see beyond the Limpopo River, and that's where I believe we're making a difference, and without being too much of a hard sell. The issue is African content, and Africa as a market has been identified by the International Monetary Fund as the third fastest growing regional economic hub in the world after China and India. That means there's a market of 750 million consumers in sub-Saharan Africa, and South African companies have not ventured north of the Limpopo River in any way whatsoever. Naspers has gone to China, and they've even had that stake in the Russian internet company, which they tried to dump recently. But the issue is it's certainly becoming a global market, and ignoring Africa is something that media companies are going to be doing at their peril, because when you look at the content that people are looking at on ABN Digital, and as far as CNBC Africa is concerned, 80% of that content query is coming from beyond the borders of Africa. So it's people in Asia, people in the US, people in Europe wanting to know about business opportunities in Africa, wanting to know about views from an African perspective. So that's where I believe some companies will get it right, and others who have not ventured into Africa and have spoken about it at their excos and their bosbarats every year. They speak about it, and it's about a 5-minute agenda item. And I was at one of those former companies. I don't want to mention names, but I was at one of those former companies, and Africa as a strategy has always just been a 5-minute discussion at the end of their strategy. Over here, it's an 80% strategy discussion about what's happening in Africa, where is it happening, and how do we get that content. Because at the end of the day, as a media company, you can only decide, are you a content player or are you a platform player? And from a content perspective, a media company that focuses on content is the one that's going to get it right.